We've been discussing how the transgender charity Mermaids lost a legal challenge against LGB Alliance, and it means that the charity can keep its charitable status. Well, let's get the legal view now with lawyer Sarah Phillimore. Welcome to the show. So this is obviously a huge case. It's the first time one charity has tried to strip another charity of its status. What happens now? Well, what happens now is general jubilation. It's another victory for reality and for common sense. But unfortunately, I feel like we're on a kind of not very funny Groundhog Day. I keep coming and talking to you, we're celebrating these amazing victories, and yet we're seeing still institutions utterly captured and utterly appearing to ignore the law. But no, it was a hugely significant victory. Because it may not have gone this way. I mean, a lot of people weren't sure which way it was going to go because they, like you say, people believe that all the institutions are captured by gender ideology, perhaps even including the judiciary. Well, it's an interesting point because the standing point, I don't think anybody thought that Mermaids could win on the standing point. What does that mean exactly? They had to show that they had a right to bring the litigation. Yes. The charities, I think there's a 2011 statute that says you've got to be affected by the decision. We can't just let people, if they feel like it, challenge the registration of a charity. The Charities Commission's got to be trusted to do the job. So Mermaids said, we've got standing because this has affected our income and also the LGB Alliance has been rude about us. And effectively, the tribunal said, well, tough. Yeah. You don't have a right to the money, you don't have a right not to be criticised, so that doesn't give you standing. So there is something about the proponents of gender identity ideology who do seem to have a sense of entitlement. Anyone who disagrees with our perspective must be taken down. You know, that's why they've gone after LGB Alliance. And we saw at Trans Pride yesterday an activist calling for the people present to punch what they call TERFs in the face to a huge round of applause. We played it earlier. We've got no clearer example of what's been happening, I think, over the last 30 years of embedding gender identity ideology as something which is beyond reproach, beyond criticism, and simply the ultimate goal of any human rights activists. Now, I've reported Sarah Jane Baker's activities to the probation service. This is the person who made this statement at Trans Pride. Because that man has tweeted to me saying he's going to turn up at an event I'm hosting on the 22nd of July in Manchester. Now, I thought no more of it. I ignored him. Then, of course, yesterday I saw the video and I was extremely concerned, even more concerned by the response of the Met, who don't seem to understand the law, who seem to think that this man has an Article 10 right to encourage others to punch women in the face. How is that not incitement to violence? Well, it is. Right. It is encouraging people to commit violence. I think Dennis Kavanagh did a very useful Twitter thread setting out the 2007 Act, Section 44, encouraging or assisting others to commit a criminal offence. There is no doubt that that is a criminal offence. Can you imagine what would have happened to me if I'd stood up in front of 2,500 people and said, go and punch a trans person in the face? I would be arrested, and rightly so. Rightly so, but you don't hear that at Let Women Speak events or feminist events. No. You know, this idea, I mean, Clive Lewis said that, well, this kind of violent rhetoric is on both sides of this debate. I frankly think that's wrong. It's a lie. I'm sorry. It is a lie. This man cannot possibly, in good faith, say that and think it to be so. I cannot think of any other example where a woman has been released from prison, serving a term for torture, kidnap and attempted murder, and has gone on to incite a crowd to hurt trans people. It doesn't happen. These are male problems of male violence. And by some amazing sleight of hand, they have now made themselves untouchable. Yes, and if it did happen at a feminist rally, they wouldn't get a round of applause and a cheer for it, certainly. No. I think people would deal with that problem. I think we would rightly want people who did that to be arrested and to be sentenced. It's a criminal offence. It is wrong. And this spread of this ideology, you've been talking this week about how it's entered the Crown Prosecution Service. What's happened there? Well, the appointment of Sophie Cook last year caused me extreme anxiety. Sophie Cook is a very obvious male person who really hates women who think that sex is real. Sophie Cook was appointed the Speak Out champion for the CPS, which means they are there to embed equality, diversity and inclusion in the workforce. Sophie Cook repeatedly makes public statements about how TERFs are awful, responsible for genocides, etc. So the point is, once you have somebody like that in your institution, you are then sidestepping the internal checks and balances which are essential to keep that organisation from ideological capture. And the CPS is now issuing guidelines which use all the language of ideological capture, sex assigned at birth, cisgender, all the phrases of this belief system. The CPS has fallen. The CPS is now, without doubt, utterly captured. And I think, again, Dennis Kavanagh made the very good point. If you're a Crown prosecutor, if you're a barrister, and you're being asked to prosecute a woman
who was brought into court for putting up her wedding photos because her husband had now transitioned and called that abuse. Now, Dennis thinks that would be a breach of our barristers' code of conduct, and I agree.
Well, isn't the CPS also suggesting that if a partner refuses to help fund the transition of their partner, that counts as domestic abuse?
Yes. Withholding money for transition is clearly in the guidance at Annex D as criminal coercive control.
Can the Crown Prosecution Service do its job effectively if it is so ideologically on one side of this debate?
Of course it can't. It's the nation's independent prosecuting authority. It has to be impartial. It's subject to a public sector equality duty. It must foster good relations between the various protected characteristics. It's not merely not doing that. It is actively harming women now.
Well, that is very worrying indeed. Sarah Fullermore, thanks so much for coming onto the show to explain it to us.